The Buffalo Bills are better than you think. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate why the Bills should be the clear favorites to win the AFC East in 2020 and end the New England Patriots streak of an NFL record 11 straight division titles. Now, imagine my surprise when reading through the Football Outsiders 2020 Almanac and seeing the season win total projection for the Bills. 7.9. 7.9. So in 2019, the Bills won 10 games, but in the Week 17 home loss versus the Jets, the Bills basically conceded the game since it was inconsequential to playoff seeding anyway. And they benched a few key starters and then removed almost all of the rest within the first quarter. So, when trying to assess how good the Bills were in 2019, you can't really call that a loss. Now, what probability do we assign to the Bills winning that Week 17 matchup if it had been a meaningful game? Well, if we give the Bills a 70% chance of winning, which is probably a bit conservative, then it might be more accurate to estimate that the Bills won 10.7 games in 2019 for the purposes of analysis. How then is it possible for the Football Outsiders model to predict an almost 3-win regression in 2020? Well, I'll guess by the comments below that this particular writer doesn't share my appreciation for Josh Allen, and we'll discuss that a bit more later. But first, there are a couple of very significant factors that would suggest a regression for the Bills' win total. The first of those being the 2019 schedule. In 2019, the Bills had close to the easiest imaginable schedule that one could have in the NFL. In the first half of the year, they played the Giants, Dolphins, Bengals, and Redskins, 4 of the worst 5 teams in the NFL. And the Jets weren't much better at that point. And when they met in Week 5, the Titans were an offensive train wreck. A very, very different team than the one that went on a tear at the end of the season and through the playoffs. But in the 2 toughest matchups against the Patriots and the Eagles, the Bills lost. In fact, one could argue that the Bills had 0 signature wins in 2019. In 2020, however, the Bills have one of the most difficult schedules in football, where their out-of-division games are against the Steelers and the Titans, both of whom seem like playoff teams to me prior to the season. And then the full slate from arguably the 2 toughest divisions in football, in the AFC West and the NFC West. Now, that's a very tough schedule, and certainly a lot more difficult than they faced in 2019. None of those 10 out-of-division opponents looks like an easy win at this point, in the way that the Giants, Redskins, and Bengals were last year. Secondly, the Bills were unusually healthy last year. Considering the Pro Football Reference stat approximate value, if you look at the 12 most important players on the Bills, White, Edmonds, Murphy, Allen, Milano, Hughes, Latulele, John Brown, Dawkins, Hyde, and Poyer, they missed a total of 1 start in the first 15 games. We've eliminated the meaningless Week 17 game with the Jets for this calculation. So 1 start in the regular season. So basically, their top tier players were almost 100% healthy in 2019. And one wouldn't expect this level of good fortune to repeat itself in 2020. And so, on the basis of those two factors, you have to figure the regression seems likely. But here is where the Football Outsider model missed the mark. The Bills are definitely on the rise. And to fully understand my position and why I believe that the Football Outsiders model has missed the mark here by a significant margin, you have to understand the trajectory that led the 2020 Buffalo Bills to this place. The story leading up to the beginning of their Super Bowl window. The current Buffalo Bills brain trust originated in 2017 with head coach Sean McDermott and defensive coordinator Leslie Frazier arriving in January, and then general manager Brandon Beane signing on in May. As an aside, I remember Leslie Frazier as a starting corner and the interception leader for probably the best defense that I've ever seen, the 1985-1986 Chicago Bears. That team in their 3 playoff games led up a grand total of 10 points. And the touchdown was scored in garbage time in the fourth quarter of the Super Bowl with the Patriots, and the Bears up 44-3. So basically 3 games, 3 total meaningful points against in the playoffs. Unbelievable. Anyway, I mention this because the Bills' defense, and especially Micah Hyde and Tre'Davious White in the secondary, they kind of play with a confidence and instinctiveness that reminds me of that group sometimes. Anyway, I digress. Back to the narrative. So, despite 2017 being a reasonably successful season, the master plan for changing of the guard and building something from the ground up was underway. They let Stephon Gilmore, Robert Woods, Nickel Roby-Coleman, and Mike Gillislee all leave in 2017 free agency. And then they traded Sammy Watkins, Ronald Darby, Reggie Ragland, and Marcel Darius during the year. Of their 2017 highest rated players in terms of AV, only a third made it through 2018. And with Lorenzo Alexander's recent retirement, only 25% remain. Hyde, Hughes, and Dion Dawkins, who was a rookie at that time. Now, this cleansing also came with a heavy price tag, which came due in 2018 to the order of $70 million in dead cap. So of the $188,783,459 that the Bills were allowed to spend in 2018, only slightly more than half of that went to guys who actually played football for them. Retrospectively, there were 2 rays of hope at this difficult time. One, the Bills had drafted 5 guys in 2017 and 2018 who would become the most important ingredient in a successful rebuilding effort. Foundational players on rookie contracts, those being Tre'Davious White, Dion Dawkins, and Matt Milano from the 2017 draft, and Josh Allen and Tremaine Edmonds in the 2018 draft. The other being that they had Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier to craft the defense, and a bunch of remaining talent left on that side of the ball. But On opening day 2018, there was a massive outstanding issue, like an all lights flashing, all alarms sounding type issue. Which is that besides Shady McCoy and Charles Clay, both of whom were a bit past their primes at that point, they had no other active player on offense who had a base salary of more than $2 million. And to lead this bargain basement offense into Baltimore for the opener, they tasked young Nathan Peterman, who had struggled mightily in his 4 appearances in 2017, with a line of 24 for 49 with 2 TDs and 5 interceptions in just 252 passing yards in those 4 appearances, including 2 starts. In the end, this questionably conceived experiment ended by TKO with 11:22 remaining in the third quarter of week 1, and the Baltimore Ravens up 40-0. Nathan Peterman's stats: 5 for 18 for 24 yards with 2 interceptions and 1 rushing yard. And these were the conditions under which Josh Allen took the field in his very first game as a professional. And Josh Allen made a very solid accounting of himself during his rookie season, considering the circumstances. In his 11 starts, the Bills were 5-6 with that offense. Now consider that in the 4 games started by Peterman and Anderson, the Bills put up only 20 total points in over 14 quarters. And for what it's worth, Derek Anderson had a long and reasonably decent career. And Nathan Peterman is at the moment the 2nd-string quarterback for the Raiders. So these guys are actual NFL quarterbacks. Now, judging by the performance of his peers, Josh Allen made the best of a very bad situation and achieved decent results. On the new Bills calendar, 2018 is year 1, the year of bottoming out and starting anew. On this calendar, 2019 was year 2, the first effort to field a legitimately competitive team. The cap situation had improved substantially from 2018, although it was still far from ideal, given that they still had almost $17 million in dead cap on the books. Their 2019 offseason mission was to completely overhaul the offense, and so the Bills waded into free agency and frugally shopped for a new offensive line and set of wide receivers. And then they also used 3 of their 4 draft picks on offense as well. And of the 12 offensive players who played significant snaps in the wild card game, 10 of them were new to the team in 2019. So to recap, in 2019, year 2 on the calendar of the new Bills, they had a less than ideal cap situation, a very inexperienced quarterback, and an almost entirely new group of offensive personnel, and somehow they still managed to win 10 games, or, by my logic, 10.7 games. That's a big success, no matter how easy the schedule was. Okay, here we arrive at the thesis for this whole video. 2020, year 3 on the calendar of the new Bills. This is the all-in year, the first year of their Super Bowl window. Now, I assume this has been the plan all along. Reshuffle the roster, take the necessary cap hits, and sort of bottom out. Build through the draft, and then when the right moment comes, and when you have your cap situation in order, note they have just $4 million in dead cap for 2020, and an excellent nucleus of young talent, then you push your chips into the middle. In the 2020 offseason, the Bills had a net inflow of $30 million a year in salaries. First, they addressed the main roster weakness, the lack of a frontline receiver who could effectively run all the patterns in the route tree, by adding Stephon Diggs via trade with the Minnesota Vikings. Note that in this trade, they gave up their first-round draft pick, something that would have been unthinkable in the rebuilding phase. But now that they're preparing to compete for a championship, giving away some future upside in order to improve your immediate chances seems like a logical maneuver. Second, Beane and McDermott sort of made a push to get the band back together by raiding the Panthers roster as they transferred to new management, and also adding old friend Josh Norman, who previously had huge success under McDermott in Carolina. And third, they tried to replace the production of defensive linemen Shaq Lawson and Jordan Phillips, who they lost in free agency, and situational linebacker Lorenzo Alexander, who retired. Now, of the three, I think that Phillips creates the biggest void because he made some eye-opening plays in 2019. Now, I understand the logic of not signing him off an anomaly year statistically, but I'll be interested to see how he performs in Arizona. He has a rare combination of size and athleticism. Okay, so once again, I feel that the Bills are poised to compete for a championship in 2020 because this has been the plan all along, and all factors are aligned presently towards this end. Now, on the other hand, as everybody knows by now, the New England Patriots lost Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski to the Bucs, and it's difficult to overstate their contributions to the recent success of the Patriots. But I'm going to give you a bunch of other reasons why the Bills are the logical favorites in the AFC East. Now, the 2019 games between the Patriots and the Bills were very close. Both came down to the final minutes. And it could be argued that the Bills would have won the Week 4 game in Buffalo if Josh Allen hadn't been knocked out of the game at the beginning of the fourth quarter. But regardless, the difference between the two teams was very small. While the 2020 Bills are in the sweet spot of their cap cycle, this is the worst situation that the Patriots have been in, personnel-wise, in quite some time. And this is even if we exclude the quarterback position from our analysis. First of all, Bill Belichick has been a master at avoiding bad long-term contracts and resulting dead cap. But in 2019, that turned for the worse with the Antonio Brown debacle. And in 2020, they have over $25 million in dead cap. More than half of that to Brady, and then another chunk of that remaining part to Antonio Brown. Now, the Patriots situation is exacerbated by their losses in free agency. While the Bills were net acquirers to the tune of about $30 million a year, the Patriots lost the equivalent of over $55 million in salaries, or maybe $50 million is a more accurate estimate when we consider Cam Newton's incentives. So gone are Brady and Gronkowski. Their best front seven defender in Kyle Van Noy, and maybe the hero of the last Super Bowl run. Veteran Jamie Collins, who blossomed in his return to Foxborough. Deron Harmon was a reliable safety in their big nickel package, which served as their base defense at times. Elandon Roberts was always a stout run defender and was also a more than adequate fill-in at fullback last year after James Devlin went down. Danny Shelton was a key piece in the defensive tackle rotation and a first-rate run defender. Ted Karras filled in admirably as the starting center when David Andrews went down. And special teams ace Nate Ebner. Just a colossal loss of important contributors that will be very difficult to overcome, especially with no high-profile free agents being added, except, of course, for Cam, who is on the ultimate prove-it deal. Now, one tough year of free agency would be one thing, but this raid on their core players has been going on for several years now. In 2018, they lost their Pro Bowl left tackle Nate Solder to what I think might have been the largest contract ever for an O-lineman at the time. They also lost their fill-in starting right tackle Cameron Fleming. Major playoff contributors in Danny Amendola and Dion Lewis. And of course, Super Bowl hero Malcolm Butler. As far as incoming free agents were concerned, well, Jeremy Hill shined very briefly at running back before getting injured, never to return. And Adrian Claiborne was a starting in for a while before falling out of favor and never really having much of an impact. So 2018 was another year of major net losses in free agency. And in 2019 wasn't much better. They lost left tackle Trent Brown, who emerged as a Pro Bowl caliber tackle in his year with the team, and their best and most versatile defensive lineman in some time in Trey Flowers. Return man and generally dangerous jack of all trades Cordarrelle Patterson. Starting receiver Chris 7-11 Hogan. And starting defensive tackle and former first-round choice Malcolm Brown. And really, Jamie Collins, since departed, was the only big impact addition that they got in return, although the tight end platoon of Watson and Lacoste was the best they had last year. And the return of the ultra-versatile and super reliable Brandon Bolden was also certainly a plus. And Terrence Brooks may work his way into the safety rotation this year with 2 spots up for grabs. But suffice to say, on the whole, the Patriots roster has been absolutely decimated by free agency in the last few years. Now, one small plus in this was that they picked up a bunch of compensatory picks for their net free agent losses. And they were in a position to mitigate some of those losses in the draft with all those extra picks. Unfortunately for the Patriots, the drafts between 2017 and 2019 have to be seen as net failures in aggregate, given the production of those that were drafted. For comparison, look at what the Bills did in these same drafts with less picks. They landed 9 solid starters, including superstar Tre'Davious White. Zay Jones, their leading receiver in 2018, is the only top 3 pick in that period that's not a current starter. Now, of the Patriots draftees, Chase Winovich had a good rookie year and looks like he was a good draft value. Jawan Bentley looked great in his first couple of games, and maybe he can revert to his rookie form with more regular playing time. And Jarrett Stidham could prove to be a steal, but he likely won't affect the outcome much when sitting behind Cam Newton. On the other hand, Antonio Garcia never saw the field. Duke Dawson never made much of a contribution. And we're still awaiting a verdict on many of their choices who haven't found their way into the regular rotation to date. But we'll find out soon, because with the losses in free agency and the COVID opt-outs, Dante Hightower, Patrick Chung, and Marcus Cannon, the Patriots are going to be forced to insert some of their unproven draftees into the lineup and hope for the best, I guess. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning, I guess, is that Belichick has consistently turned undrafted free agents into important contributors. Malcolm Butler was one. J.C. Jackson, who's probably their best player playing on a rookie contract, has steadily emerged as one of the league's best young corners and will soon be in line for a big contract extension. And undrafted free agent wide receivers Jacoby Myers and Gunnar Olszewski could make their presences felt this year in an inexperienced wide receiver room. Finally, the logical product of all of the above factors is that the Patriots have very few bargain contracts on their books, super high value contracts. And this is an essential ingredient in the NFL championship formula. Now, in the past, for the Patriots, that formula started with Tom Brady consistently taking less than the market would bear, and included both astute bargain shopping by Belichick and a lot of good one-year prove-it deals that regularly worked out for the Pats. But this year, the cupboard seems to be bare. Here are some of the 2019 contracts and cap figures that provided excellent value for the Patriots. The four guys in yellow left in free agency, with Van Noy, Collins, and Shelton all getting considerable raises. In addition, the guys at the bottom saw their cap hits jump from 2019 to 2020, and thus some of the bang for the buck has disappeared. And since there aren't too many guys on rookie contracts that are killing it for the Patriots, there are a few on their roster that are playing on especially team-friendly deals. Again, J.C. Jackson, $750,000 is a huge steal. But go on Spot Track and try to find the other diamonds in the rough on their roster, and they're few and far between. Now, finally, Belichick's also frequently maneuvering in the trade market and in other ways not tied to the March free agent period. And usually he'll unearth a few guys this way who really help out. But recently those maneuvers have been extremely unsuccessful. Like Antonio Brown is the obvious one. That cost him a bunch of cap space. Mohamed Sanu cost him a second-round pick. And then he was so ineffective that they cut him with a year to go on his contract. And Michael Bennett never really made the big impact that many were expecting. So all in all, I think it's really hard to see the present Patriots personnel situation as anything but bleak. Now, I'd expect that Bill Belichick will eventually right the ship and get the Patriots back to serious contender status in the near future. But for now, the AFC East is wide open. Now let's contrast the Bills' contract portfolio against the Patriots. The 9 rookie contracts mentioned above are $60 or $70 million a year under fair value. And really, if you look up and down at their contracts, there's really no bad deals on their books. Their contract situation is impeccable. Now, admittedly, Bill Belichick is indeed the greatest coach of all time. But he's always the first one to point out that football in the NFL is a player's game. And it seems to me that the Bills players are just much better than the Patriots players at present. And I don't think that coaching can overcome such a large deficit. All right, one last point before we go. For those making snarky comments about Josh Allen. In 2018, with the worst supporting cast in football by far and $70 million in dead cap, Josh Allen somehow managed to lead the Bills to a very respectable 5-6 in games that he started. And this was as a rookie coming to the NFL from the farm to Wyoming to training camp with very limited experience against top competition. And then in 2019, he led the Bills to a 10-5 record in games that mattered. 10-5. So what's that add up to? 15-11 as they come up the curve of the rebuilding phase. Now, how can that guy be a major liability to his team? All right. That's it for this episode of Better Than You Think, brought to you by Clock Football. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel by hitting the green logo above. And if you have any feedback, please feel free to share it in the comments section below. The first Sunday of the 2020 NFL season is tomorrow. Woo! Enjoy and good night.